make it make sense. Like this is, we in danger, y'all. We are in dangers. Oh my gosh, what a week, what a week, what a week in Black news. For those of you who aren't familiar, I am Kim, aka Kim with the Gems. And once a week on this channel, we are going to cover the most pressing, most trending, non-entertainment topics related to our culture. And so this is, I think, maybe week 3. It's going to be a doozy. There is so much going on. So let's just get into it. We'll talk about Texas redistricting, mapping. We'll talk about them holding one of the congresswomen hostage. We'll talk about what Gavin Newsom is doing in, retaliation. We're going to talk about how 55 million visas will be up for review. And we know those 55 million visas will target Black and Brown people. We're going to talk about Uganda. I don't know why I know why so many of our African countries are capitulating and now part of we'll take the immigrants off your hands, right? I have a great clip from the brilliant Sherilyn Ifill, formerly of the NAACP. She's breaking it down to the very last compound. I'm going to reference the Native Land podcast where she appeared, I want to say yesterday. Well, they posted it, I think, yesterday. And she gives some real insights as to where she sees this country headed, especially for us, right? We're also going to talk about the new list that came out, the Black billionaire class of 2025. There's 23 names on the list. Many of them I can't pronounce, but we're going to talk about why that's important. Also, did you hear? Listen, they released the Emmett Till files. Like I don't know what to say about what is going on. We're also going to talk about some business news because as much as we talk about other areas, there's some business news happening that we should be aware of. If you don't understand what these things mean that I'm going to go over, do your research and see how it can impact us as a community. Yeah, we're going to talk about Canada caving. Listen, at the end of the day, they're playing chess right now, and some of these things may or may not make sense to you, but they will affect us. They will affect us. We're also going to talk about a state that has implemented an America First strategy. It's a red state who has teachers who have come from blue states and what they're implementing as part of their licensing or their certification in order to teach. So yeah, it's a lot. We're in some interesting times and we are going to try to stay ready so we don't have to get ready. So as these times get more challenging, more interesting, we are ready for them. We're going to get into the Hannah Nicole Jones clip real quick, and we'll talk about that first. You may remember her from the 1619 Project. There we go. So this is Hannah Nicole Jones, and she is going to give her take and breakdown on the BS that was spewed on public television. Let's go ahead.
Hey, y'all. I do not usually do these videos, but as a creator of the 1619 Project and someone who has studied the history of slavery for 3 decades, I could not let that viral CNN clip of Jillian Michaels stand. I have to first state that the times are far too serious and dangerous for us to lend our platforms to harmful nonsense. It's simply irresponsible with everything that's happening in this country to have someone as credentialist as Jillian Michaels on a major network show legitimizing the erasure of our history. Now, I know there have been some viral efforts to debunk her claim that somehow slavery was a side institution in the United States because less than 2% of white people owned slaves. But even those efforts, while valiant, by embracing this right-wing framing, they still aren't really getting to it. You see, this is how numbers and data, though technically true, can also be lies. And this is why we can't let bad faith actors set the parameters of the debate or of our collective understanding. So please bear with me because this is a lot. Let's take the fewer than 2% of white people owned slaves at face value, though we know that number is technically incorrect. And let's apply that standard to any other industry. What percentage of Americans own social media companies or technology companies such as Apple? It's a tiny percentage. I'm doubtful if it's even 1% of Americans. And
let me just say, pay attention to how she is going to debunk the stupid analogy that this woman gave with no real context and no real one really to like go hard at her. So yeah, so let's go ahead and finish listening to how Miss Hannah Nicole Jones breaks this down, like I like to say, to the very last compound.
And yet no one would credibly argue that social media companies are not ubiquitous across American life, that they don't play a major influence on our political, social, and economic life in America. And in fact, what we know is that more than 70% of Americans use social media, though hardly any Americans own social media platforms. There's a reason that the heads of Meta, Apple, and Amazon, Google, and X all took part in Trump's inauguration festivities, with several of them standing on the actual dais during Trump's inauguration. These men also happen to be amongst the wealthiest in the world and demonstrate how a small cadre of super wealthy men can have an outsized impact on American politics and culture.
And I don't think she says this, but let me just add a caveat. When that idiotic woman said only 2% of Americans or white Americans owned slaves, guess what? Only 1% of this country control 90% of the wealth in this country. I mean, it really doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that the number 2% means absolutely nothing without the full context of the story. And Miss Hannah Nicole Jones is about to break down the full context of the story.
This is just critical thinking, y'all. So if we want to play the numbers game, the much more important measure is what percentage of Americans own slaves? No, but what percentage of those empowered did? So here we go. Before 1865, the end of slavery in the United States, 63% of US presidents had been slave owners at some point in their lives. More than 1,800 members of Congress owned slaves, meaning between 1789 and 1819, more than half of the men elected to Congress each session were slave owners. What about the Supreme Court? 26 of this nation's first 30 Supreme Court justices were enslavers, and about half of all the Supreme Court justices before the Civil War were enslavers. So many Supreme Court justices were enslavers that if we added up all the Supreme Court justices coming all the way to this present court, 1 out of 4 of all Supreme Court justices in this nation's history were enslavers. I mean, let's just look at our money. All but one of the people on our cash currency engaged in African slavery. Look at the $1 bill, $2 bill, 10, 20, 50, 100. All these men engaged in slavery. It's weird that we didn't value all those non-slave holding white people enough to put them on our money. The majority of the most powerful men in this country, the men who made the federal laws, interpreted the laws, and enforced the laws, built their wealth on African slavery. And I assure you, that number says much more about the country we inhabit than that 2%. But let's not stop there, because
listen, I want y'all to listen to the entire breakdown that she gives. I just want to read this comment right here because I think it's kind of brilliant. Dr. B.K. Wallace says, it never ceases to amaze me how CNN will give an audience and a voice to some of the most intellectually ignorant people spouting information that can be refused with looking at the scholarship, scholarship on this matter, all under the guise of appearing even keel when they're actually perpetuating the stereotypical thoughts through complicity. Listen, at the end of the day, stop watching that BS channel, please, y'all. Please and thank you. I'm not saying there may not be 1 or 2 people that you may find value from, but don't take their programming as part of anything other than propaganda. And trying to get views and clicks and go viral. Let's just go ahead and move on. So, this is quite interesting. Came out a couple days ago, but Oklahoma mandates America First certification for out of state teachers. Let's just quickly read through what that means. Oklahoma, the state ranked last in U.S. education, can't make this up, will now require teachers from Democratic led states to pass an America First certification before being allowed to teach in its classroom. The America First certification, announced by the Republican state superintendent, is aimed at blocking what he calls radical leftist ideology from entering Oklahoma schools. As long as I'm superintendent, Oklahoma classrooms will be safeguards from the radical leftist ideology fostered in places like California and New York. We know what this is about. Again, you can read through this. I want to get through all of these things in a timely manner. But even though this is starting in Oklahoma, understand, similarly to how the federal government now is making people write essays, basically bowing down and saying that, they agree with the man in charge. This is going to happen across other red states, probably sooner than later, where they are going to have their teachers basically promise that they will not teach anything that is fragile to the hot man's ego. This is absolutely going to affect not just our students, right? But the country as a whole by not learning the truth, but instead learning what they want us to know, right? Oh, yeah, let's get into it. Oh, the National Guard troops are still rolling into the city. And as someone who has plans to be there in October for Howard's homecoming, I am concerned. Military reverses course. They will now arm 2,000 National Guard troops in DC. So, for those of you that didn't know, prior to this announcement, the National Guard, although not necessary, they were patrolling unarmed. Well, now that is changing. So let's just see what the drunkard said. Mr. Hexeth has directed that the National Guard now be armed as they patrol the streets of Washington, D.C., making a reversal of the military's previous stance that troops wouldn't carry weapons. Do y'all see the disaster that awaits? They're not being armed because of the white citizens, right? Not at all. So 800 members of the DC National Guard were initially deployed amid 47's federal takeover of the city to combat what he called rampant lawlessness. Now, let's just keep going on. Now, nearly 2,000 National Guard troops are stationed at the Capitol after hundreds were recently deployed from her Republican-led states. Surprise, surprise. Imagine being in the National Guard, man, and taking an oath to defend enemies, right? And here you are set up at at Union Station, which is the main train station in DC. For those of you that don't know, when I say main train station, it's where Amtrak comes and goes, right? It's where it's the central hub for many of the subway lines that go through DC, and it's quite busy. It's also a place full of retail shops and restaurants where on a Friday night we used to go hang out, have dinner, and now the National Guard is stationed there, and from all accounts they are picking up innocent delivery drivers, innocent people who are just out and about driving. But now these National Guards are going to carry weapons. Why? Well, I think we know why. If you're going to DC, if you live in DC, be careful. Be careful. Also, if you are immigrant carrying a legal visa, you too may be under scrutiny, especially if you are here on the spectrum, right? Or even here on the spectrum and not here on the spectrum of color. I think we all know somebody who is here on a legal visa, who has legal visa status. This is from the Associated Press. Trump administration is reviewing all 55 million foreigners with U.S. visas for any violation. So let's just quickly read what this means. His administration said Thursday it is reviewing more than 55 million people who have valid U.S. visas for any violations that could lead to deportation, part of a growing crackdown on foreigners who are permitted to be in the United States. In a written answer to questions from the Associated Press, the State Department said all U.S. visa holders, which can include tourists from many countries, are subjected to continuous vetting with an eye towards any indication they could be ineligible for permission to enter or stay in the United States. Should such information be found, the visa will be revoked, and if the visa holder is in the United States, he or she will be subject to deportation. So let's get into what Uganda has announced. Follow the money and you'll have your answer, right? Uganda agrees to a deal with the U.S. to take deported migrants if they don't have criminal records. Then why the hell are you deporting them? Why the hell are you deporting them without going through some other process to get them back to their homeland? Even if there was a criminal record, this is not the way to go about it. Uganda has agreed to a deal with the United States to deport migrants as long as they don't have criminal records and are not unaccompanied minors. So do know that they will be deporting unaccompanied minors. But Uganda says, nope, that's where we draw the line. No criminals and no unaccompanied minors. The ministry said in a statement that the agreement had been concluded, but that the terms were still being worked out. How do you conclude the agreement if you're still working out the terms of the agreement? It added that Uganda prefers that the migrants sent there be of African nationalities, but did not elaborate on what Uganda might get in return for accepting deportees. So if they don't have criminal records and you're going to send them back to Africa, send them back to their home country. Like, this is so confusing and disgusting. And what does of African nationalities, like, would I constitute as that? Well, I'm not a migrant, but still, do they know? This is just so disgusting. Again, no criminal history. Make it make sense. Like, this is, we in danger, y'all. We are in danger.